On this first Sunday in Lent, we journey with Jesus into the wilderness. During Lent, we strive to live more simply and be more aware of the elements in life that sustain us. Just a short time ago, we lit the candles of the Advent wreath, welcoming the light of the world as each week the light grew brighter. Now the Lenten candles have been lit, but in the coming weeks, the light will slowly fade into darkness as we draw nearer to Jesus' death. Yet Lent is not a depressing period of the church calendar. Instead, Lent is an acknowledgement of the brokenness that exists in our lives and in our world. And as we acknowledge that brokenness, we also move toward wholeness. In fact, our denomination's motto is a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. Our theme this year is Lent, a journey to new life. As we move toward new life, we must let go of the things that hold us back. And today we let go of the past. Not all the past, because our past helps us to understand who we are. But our past can also hold us back. So today we let go of those things in our past that stop us from embracing our present and our future.
this Hebrew Bible reading, we hear the familiar story of Adam and Eve. The Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say, 'You shall not eat from any tree of the garden'?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you will die.'" But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. This is the reading. This is the word of God. Rabbi Rita Sherwin, I welcome you as my teacher.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for welcoming me here today. You know, as a rabbi, a lot of my job is leading worship services, and I hardly ever get to be in the congregation. And I just want to let you know that your service is so beautiful. I feel very peaceful inside, and I'm really glad to be here. And thank you to Reverend Caleb and Reverend Dennis for welcoming me, and to Reverend Janet, who invited me here. I've had many really positive experiences with your church since I moved here 22 years ago. And I've done a lot of interfaith work with your church, and I was a good friend of Carla Halverson, and she loved you guys so much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Garden of Eden. I'm going to start off by telling you the story, which you already know. The story, of course, of the Garden of Eden in Adam and Eve comes from the Torah, which is the Hebrew word that means teaching and instruction, which refers to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And it comes from the book of Genesis, which in Hebrew is called Bereshit, which means in the beginning. And we read that in the beginning, God creates a world filled with plants and birds and animals, and God calls it in Hebrew, God looks at what God has created and says, this is tov, the Hebrew word that means good. This world is tov. And then, what's even better, as God calls it, tov ma'od, is on the sixth day of creation, when God creates us, when God creates human beings. God names the first person Adam in Hebrew, or Adam in English, which means, it's from the Hebrew word Adamah, which means earth. So actually what it says, that God created an Adam out of the Adamah, it's like saying God created an earthling out of the earth. And God places Adam in the Garden of Eden, telling him to tend it and to enjoy its fruits. In the middle of the garden are two special trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God tells Adam that he may eat of any of the plants in the garden, including fruit from the tree of life, but not to eat any fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God says, for if you do, on that day, you will die. Seeing that Adam is lonely and needs a mate, God takes one of Adam's ribs and fashions from it a new creature, called in Hebrew an Isha, And that is the word indicates that she is of the same substance of the man, who is a man in Hebrew is an ish. And she does not yet have a name. At this point, this is the point where the serpent enters the story. And this guy is a troublemaker. He tells the woman that the reason God doesn't want them to eat any fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is because if they do eat of it, then they'll become like God, and God won't appreciate that. But when the woman sees how tempting the fruit is, she takes a piece and eats it and gives Adam a bite as well. Immediately, the Torah tells us they feel ashamed because they are naked. And when I read this, I always think it's like a dream that a lot of people have, like you're out in public and all of a sudden you realize you don't have any clothes on, like the emperor's new clothes. So this is maybe how it felt to Adam and to the woman. Adam and the woman hear God walking around in the garden, and they hide from God. And God says to them in Hebrew, Ayeka, or in English, where are you? Thereby asking the very first question that was ever asked. And God says, how do you know you're naked anyway? Have you been eating from that tree that I told you not to eat from? Adam says, it wasn't my fault, the woman made me do it. The woman says, it wasn't my fault, the serpent made me do it. And the chatty serpent, for once, is speechless. God curses the serpent, telling him that from now on it will crawl on its belly and eat dirt. That is the serpent's punishment. God tells the woman that pregnancy and childbirth will be very painful for her, but that she will desire the man sexually, and from now on the man will tend to boss her around, and that's her punishment. Then God says to Adam, by the sweat of your brow you shall till the soil. In other words, earning your living will be really hard, and that's Adam's punishment. And then God says, someday you shall die, returning to the earth that you are made of, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Amidst all this stress, thank God something pleasant does happen, and this is that Adam gives the woman a name. He names her Chava, or in English, Eve, which means that she is the mother of all that lives. But then God drives Adam and Eve out of the garden, stationing to the east of Eden angels with flaming swords. What a story. Do you remember hearing this as a child? And if so, were you confused? And did you ask yourself any of these questions? Why did God punish Adam and Eve so harshly? Pain, death, banished from paradise just for breaking one rule? Why did God create that fruit in the first place if God didn't want Adam and Eve to eat it? Was God setting them up? If the forbidden fruit that came from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if the forbidden fruit came from this tree, the knowledge of good and evil, doesn't this imply that before they ate it, Adam and Eve had no knowledge of good and evil? And if they didn't, how could they have been expected to know that it was wrong to disobey God? In his book, How Good Do We Have to Be?, Rabbi Harold Kushner gives us an approach to the story that I find very interesting. He suggests that instead of being about how sinful we are, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is about how complicated, painful, and wonderful it is to be a human being. So that when God told Adam not to eat fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God was not so much making a rule as giving a warning. It's like if a person whose friend is in line for a promotion at work, and the person says to his or her friend, you know, if you do get that job, you'll have a lot more responsibility. You won't get as much time to spend with your family. You'll have to make hard decisions that may hurt innocent people. Your life is going to be so much more complicated. Are you sure you want that job? Perhaps God actually wanted Adam and Eve to eat the fruit. Doing so would complicate their lives, but it would also make them more fully human. Eating the fruit would also make them more like God. And despite what the serpent said, God wanted that to happen, for Adam and Eve to be even more in the image of God, but Tselem Elohim in Hebrew. God would want them to be more like God, because that is the way that they were originally created. When God tells Adam and Eve that sexuality, parenthood, and making a living will not be a piece of cake, God is not punishing them, but telling them like it is. Once you know the difference between good and evil, life isn't so easy anymore. You're no longer in the Garden of Eden, but you are alive in the world. When you read the original story of Adam and Eve in the Torah, you can see how much it has become distorted. Nowhere is the snake said to be Satan, for example. And how does Eve get blamed for everything? In the biblical text itself, Eve can easily be seen not as the villain, but as the hero of the story. Some of us have images, I do have an image in my mind of Eve tasting the fruit and immediately running off to find Adam and enticing him to eat some too. But if you read it in the Torah, that explicitly tells us that Adam is not off in some far distant corner of the garden, but rather he is, and the Hebrew word is imah, he is with her, he is there with Eve. He's present during the entire conversation between Eve and the serpent. Eve is portrayed neither as neither gullible nor seductive. Reaching out to eat the fruit, to take a bite of the fruit, she is taking a courageous step into the unknown, to discover a whole new world. And out of love, she reaches back for Adam, and he goes forward with her into the realm of the knowledge of good and evil. The story of Adam and Eve, I'm suggesting, is not about people being punished for making a mistake and being exiled from paradise for not being perfect. It's about each one of us growing up, leaving home, and venturing into the world. It tells us that we will make mistakes in our lives, sometimes bad mistakes, but not because we are bad. We make mistakes because life is difficult and because we are human. Eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil may have been a sin, but it's also an essential phase of human growth. The consequences might be difficult for us in the same way that leaving our parents' home may be difficult, or the responsibilities of marriage and parenthood can be difficult, or being out in the workplace so we can make money and provide for ourselves and our families. In the same way that moral demands and moral decisions can be difficult. But for those of us who have experienced the richness and complexities, the hard-won battles and hard-earned satisfactions, the pain and the joy of our existence, this is a story about growing up and a metaphor for what it means to become a fully conscious, fully human adult. Rabbi Kushner imagines an alternate ending to the story of Adam and Eve, and it goes something like this. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree looked like it was good to eat, the serpent said to her, "Go ahead, eat it. It will make you as smart as God." But the woman replied, "No, God commanded us not to eat it, and I will not disobey God." So God called to the man and the woman, and God said to them, "Because you have not disobeyed me, I shall reward you greatly." To the man, God said, "You will never have to work again. You can just spend all your days in the hammock drinking beer, and groceries will be delivered to your door free of charge whenever you want." And to the woman, God said, "Having children and raising them is no big deal. It's going to be easy. They will ignore you, and you can ignore them, and you probably won't understand what they're talking about anyway." And the man and the woman grew old together in the Garden of Eden, having a lot of children, eating and drinking all they wanted, having a lot of kids that they didn't pay much attention to. And around the trunk of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the grass grew high, almost hiding it from sight because there was nobody to take out the lawnmower and cut it. So we are, We are here, but we are here. We are here to take care of the trees, to take care of the grass, to cut the grass, to water the grass. We are here to tend the garden and to effect what is called in Hebrew tikkun olam. And while your service was going on, I saw in your definition of what it is to be a disciple of Christ, you say that it's a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. This is exactly the meaning of the Hebrew concept tikkun olam, which means fixing the world. The idea that you look around the world, you see that it's a shattered place and it's a broken place, and that we are here to fix it. Tikkun olam, or as you say in your definition of who you are, to work for wholeness in a fragmented world. This involves working to fix what is broken, doing justice, showing compassion, loving our brothers and sisters as ourselves, feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, reaching out, making a difference, and bringing peace. And I know this is exactly what you guys believe. The real story about Adam and Eve is not about sin and punishment. Rather, it concerns what it means to be human. As humans, we have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We have grown conscious and aware. We have a moral sense. We are no longer in the Garden of Eden. We're outside of the garden in the big, wide, difficult, and sometimes painful, but wonderful and beautiful world, ready to do God's work and ours. As God says on the sixth day of creation, the world that God has made is tov ma'od, is very good. And on the sixth day of creation, God also says that we are created with Tselem Elohim, in God's image, in the divine image. So what I wanted to say today is, let us go forth into the world and, like Adam and Eve, lead the lives for which we are born and the lives for which we have been created.